Aloha and welcome to Sonic Bloom Academy Virtual Workshop Series. I'm Butterfly Brielle here on behalf of Sonic Bloom Academy. And today I'm joined by Rex Finfgeld. We will be discussing the true nature of reality, and I'm just so excited to dive into this topic. This is one of my favorites, and we're just so blessed to have you here today, Rex. How you doing?
I'm wonderful today. It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Awesome, awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to let you take the full stage and I'm just so blessed to get to enjoy this presentation. Thanks so much for everyone that's attending and watching this in our new Sonic Bloom archive. Look forward to many, many more of these.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set up my share screen here. Give me just a moment. Okay. Just bear with, we're almost there. All right, just want to get a couple things set up so as we get into the presentation here, it can be as fluid as possible.
When I was 12 years old, my
All right. Okay, my name is Rex Finfgeld, and let's see here. So everything is always a little bit different when I have a setup on with Zoom here, and some of them what I'm trying to access to get to my presentation view here is there it is, slideshow. Apologies, folks. Sometimes technology doesn't go as fast as I planned for it. I tried to prepare before we got going today. Okay, I think we're getting there now. Can you see everything? Does it look good, Brielle?
Looking great on my end. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. So today what I want to do is basically go on a thought journey. Getting into talking about the true nature of gravity, I'm going to get into things like the nature of existence itself, nature of consciousness, a multi-universal existence, the unified field. I feel like gravity is perhaps the most fundamental force of existence next to consciousness. And just to give a little bit about me and where this is kind of coming from, and also where we're going to kind of go to in this presentation, things we're going to talk about, is getting into the abstractions and the depths of who we really are, what's really the nature of our very being, and if I even dare say, even God, goddess, the source, the divine, however you may perceive this. Through the course of this presentation, I'm hoping to cover all these different points. We have right around 90 minutes or so, maybe a little bit less, and when we take into consideration doing some Q&A at the end. And I'm hoping we can cover all these points. And if not, we're going to cover most of them because I want to at least get this information out there. Every one of these bullet points could literally be a couple of hour presentation unto itself. There's really a lot to this. I've been working on this for the past probably about 4 years now. And I'm going to give you a little bit of history about how this all came to be, because the truth is, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a physicist. And it seems kind of counterintuitive to the idea of somebody having a presentation and ideas about this type of subject matter. What I am, however, is a near-death experiencer. 10 years ago, I had a major fall and a major traumatic brain injury as a result. I went down 26 feet. It's in my medical records. It's in my police records, the first responder report. This picture right here is a tree that I fell out of. A long story. I'm not going to go into the whole story. That's not what this is about. But this is important as to how these ideas, these epiphanies, how this all came to be. But I fell 26 feet, hit a concrete bike path head first, had massive brain bleed. I broke 20 bones, was in a coma for 5 days. I was told by doctors, by many people, I shouldn't have survived, that I'm a walking miracle, that upon having survived, that I probably should have ended up a vegetable or severely handicapped. Make no mistake, I have serious issues for sure. I get major migraines. My memory, especially with respect to linear information, is very challenged, no directional sense. A lot of things that are easy, that used to be really easy, are very challenging now. But on the flip side of it all, my visual acuity just went way off the scale. I'm thinking thoughts, having ideas, epiphanies, insights, especially from this near-death experience, like I've never even imagined I could have. The things that I'm going to talk about right now, if you'd have told me before this near-death experience happened, I'd be having this conversation with you and discussing these ideas with you, I would just laugh. There's no way. I'm not that person. I'm not saying I was not an intelligent person before, I didn't have ideas before, but nothing like this. And just real quick, I've been a DJ my whole life. I can also compose and mix and master music now. It's something that came on very quickly. I won't get into all that right now either, but it's just another one of those crazy post-near-death experience discoveries. A lot of things have happened post-near-death experience. It's been very much a blessing and a curse. But getting into the moment while near death, the moment while I was comatose, I crashed numerous times. I was told in many of those crashes, it was a miracle I survived. I had a couple of my doctors say that they thought for sure they had lost me. That I thought for sure I was gone. So I'm assuming maybe it was one of those crashes. Maybe it was through the whole course of the 5 days. I don't really know time-wise. At this point, I don't think space-time means the same thing as it does here in our existence. We perceive time in our arrow of time from past to present to future. But in this moment, I didn't have that sense. In this space, I had a sense of just pure being. I didn't have a sense of me, the person that I am, Rex. I had no sense of my body. I just had a sense of being. I was still me, very cognizant of the I am. I was completely lucid. And if you study near-death experience, you've probably heard NDEers talk about that incredible, pure feeling of just love. I don't know how to put it. Even years later, it's hard to find the words to express just the absolute innocence, the childlike purity of just the absolute love that I felt in that moment. It wasn't that I was experiencing love, it was that I was love. And in this moment, it wasn't that I was experiencing life, that I was life, I was spirit. But also too, I was the mind, the imagination that gives rise to this entire creation itself. I was the sense of what the I am really is, what I am, what we really are. And in this space, in this sense of purity, was all space. Okay, for a moment, I was all space, whatever the expanse of the universe might really be. Okay, and all of time, past, present, and future, all at once. Imagine that just in a mere singularity unto itself. Now imagine multiple realities, parallel universes, pure probability and possibility, pure potential reality, infinite dimensions. This is where I was for a moment. This, in the most simple of terms, was my near-death experience. When I start talking about the unified field, the unified reality, which I started learning about after the NDE, I started looking at this going, wow, this is where I was. I think something I realized, and I know that there's physicists out there talking about this, and I know Nassim Haramein is one. I know he's associated with Sonic Bloom. There's Jonathan Hagelin, Amit Goswami, and there's others that are talking about the unified field being a field of consciousness, a field of dynamism, It's alive. And as I'm hearing about all of this, I'm going, yes, this is where I was. This is what I experienced. This is truth. This is the core of our reality. This is the nature of our reality, infused in love, life, mind, and imagination. And here we can see everything, the all of everything, because this is what we all really are from within. I didn't have this experience because I'm somehow separate and removed from everybody. This is just an experience that's just of the most natural state of being. Now let's have some fun, kind of get into the reason why we're here. Now we start talking about unified field and multi-universal reality. I think a lot of people, certainly in philosophy, have heard the expression, it begins where it ends where it begins. I think we start talking about the multiverse and unified field. We're talking about points of reality that really are one and the same. I feel like no matter how, from our perspective, we're thinking unified field, we're going way in. We're going through the molecular realm. We're going through the atomic and the subatomic realms. We're going into the fundamental particle realms. We're going all the way through the Higgs field into the unified reality. Again, it's a super simplified way to explain that. But yeah, I like that explanation. But then going the opposite direction. We start going out into space, out into the solar system, out into the galaxy, into the galactic clusters, out into the universe itself, out into a multiverse. Where do we end up in a space of a pure probability and possibility? It begins and where it ends. It ends where it begins. We're looking at the same level of reality, no matter which direction we go in, we end up in that essentially pure possibility of reality, infinite dimensions, no matter where we go. It ends up in that space of possibility. Space of infinite dimension, all space, all time. Anything's possible. Travel anywhere, be anything. Limited by the bounds of the imagination. In this case, the divine imagination, and whatever that really means to you in your life and your experience. We're talking about a multi-universal movement here. One of the theories that fascinates me is what's called M theory. M theory talks about the prospect, there's these massive membranes, these walls, if you will, upon which these universal embodiments are attached. And it's kind of hard to try to envision it that way. And and if that's the case, how does that all kind of connect together? And if that's and when you hear it, think of that in that context, it almost seems static. And to me, if we're talking about a unified field that is dynamic and alive and is moving, well then, if the as above, so below, it begins where it ends where it begins, it holds true here, well then that same dynamism holds true in the multiverse. And I like to utilize a couple of analogies here. The kaleidoscope and the torus. And again, a torus I know is something that's also connected, I believe, with Sonic Bloom and Nassim Haramein, because he's the one that I first heard about it through. Years ago, I saw a film called Thrive, put on, or was made by Foster Gamble, I believe was his, who put that out there. And brilliant film, by the way. And even years later, yeah, thumbs up. Years later, I think it still is a powerful film. If you haven't seen it, I still can't recommend it enough. But that's where I first heard about Nassim Haramein, and that's where I first heard about the torus. And again, I'm contemplating all these ideas at this time, and including this as I'm contemplating, this multi-universal reality, and I'm seeing this self-perpetuating, moving energy, and realizing that this is all working this way. And also at this time in my life, I was discovering the laws of thermodynamics. And that first law of thermodynamics, I think, is I think, relates to the concept of the torus, because it basically talks about that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. The amount of energy is always the same. That energy is always changing states. And it's in these energetic movements that keeps this energy constantly moving in its kaleidoscopic motions. And when you look at these kaleidoscopic images right here, and I'm going to put up some videos here in a moment to kind of get us a sense of some movement here. But you can picture, I don't know if you can see my cursor. If you can see my cursor, let's just go right to the middle right there. Now, if we're looking at a multi-universal reality, now it seems like it's a dichotomy to assume that we can observe this because we're a part of this. And what would it mean to really be able to observe this, because it's infinite and eternal? So the best we can do if we're going to attempt to observe it, quote unquote, is maybe just look at it in terms of just a piece of it. Try to create something that we would consider observable. So we could talk about it. We can have something experiential to relate to with it. Give me a moment to take a sip of water here. Yeah, cheers. All right. Imagine for a moment, our universe is right in the middle of this thing. Now, if we're talking about a true multi-universal reality, and you're going to want to use a kaleidoscope as an analogy, there really wouldn't necessarily be a discernible center. But for the sake of the example here, let's just look at our universe in the middle of all of this. Start thinking about the idea of a kaleidoscope. It might be moving outward. This shape right here can be moving outward. It can be moving inward. Now, there's already been talk of the prospect that maybe this universe has oscillated many, many times. Of course, there's talk right now. You hear many cosmologists talking about the big rip and the deep freeze, and the potential ending and demise of the universe. And sure, all things come to an end, and it's possible too. It has been suggested that maybe the universe has oscillated many times before this big rip finally occurs. And you start thinking in terms of a kaleidoscopic image, you kind of get a sense of, if the multiverse sort of works like this, and it's moving outward, and these images are coming in and out and are mixing and moving over in and infusing around and on top of and under each other, you start to get a sense a little bit of where these universes start to infuse and intertwine, and you start to get the sense of where this multi-universal reality really isn't so separate and dispersed. So if we're looking at gravity is a mover in the midst of all of this, these gravitational brains, and maybe even think about black holes in the middle of all of this. I mean, if we think about a black hole as something that's so powerful, is actually, and again, this is theoretical, obviously, this is just one idea, is something that potentially can literally fold space in and out of itself. If it's literally like infusing one potential reality, moving into another whole reality, or another universal embodiment, if you will. Now, as we start to look at the video I'm going to show here in a couple of minutes, you kind of can almost imagine how a black hole could be instrumental in the movement of these images as it's crafting through one universal embodiment into another. Now, take a moment to talk about the torus before I do this, because it's important if we're going to try to envision this somehow. The toroidal movements, I think, are very fascinating, and I like to look at the idea of these movements because they're very fluid. There's a real genuine symmetry here. And one thing I like, and I just want to deviate for just a second about fractal reality, is the idea that even amidst the chaos, there are still patterns. So no matter how seemingly chaotic the universe, life may be, existence, experience may be, there's still a pattern underlying. There's still a movement, a purpose, as difficult as it may be for us to understand. And thinking about on an atomic and on a subatomic level, we already understand that an atom can go from a hydrogen atom to an oxygen atom. We also understand subatomic particles can change from one to another. It can change spin, it can change states, they can change in a moment. We don't even understand, obviously, from an observational perspective, why that necessarily even happens. but it does. And each time it happens, energy is moving, energy is being released, energy is constantly in motion. And again, very rudimentary, but you start to get a sense of how this energy is always constantly moving. All right, so I'm going to go ahead now and see if we can't get this video to work. Now, I try to do this so this would be as easy as possible, but of course, well, that'll help. That's the one I wanted. Sorry about this, everybody. When I set this up, it was supposed to go a lot faster than this. And it's probably going to play a commercial now. All right, finally getting somewhere with this. Now that we can finally get the sense of this moving now, I can get this to go to full screen again. That would be great. Now think about this. As we're looking at this, it's not just one single universe. Now, if you can see my cursor, maybe we just go over here and I'll stop it. Maybe right here, this is our universe being born. Somewhere, and if I back that up a little bit, you can, and it closes down in itself. We can even take it all the way back to the proposed primordial particle that is theoretically where our universe began. Now, from that, as this grows out, you can see the potential. Okay, this universe is going to the cosmic inflation. It's going to the first point where the first cracks of say, of galactic formation, star formation, further black hole formation, to galactic clusters, so on and so forth, are now evolving and forming. The universe is now expanding apart. Now it pulls itself completely apart. Big rip, deep freeze, as it forms in other universal embodiments. And maybe now this area here, maybe there is a point of absolute zero taking place as it continues to evolve, as this matter and energy is moving to a different point of this multi-universal space. Because yes, even out here, I'm going to say that this is still a space-time gravity reality taking place. And again, if we're going to try to observe it from an experiential standpoint, we're looking at it through a movement of time. And again, for us as human beings in this life, it's really the only way we can do this. And again, try to have a conversation about this. Now, as you're watching this, you start to get a sense of this one universal embodiment starts to form. They infuse and form into other forms. So you start to think about, okay, well, what's going on here on top of just one universe? Clearly, there's lots of energies happening here. Let me just pick it up a little bit. Let's think about the concept of dark matter in the middle of all of this. Now, dark matter to me is even more nebulous than I think dark energy is. Because I think when we start to figure out dark matter, we're going to find out there's a lot more to it than just being a potential galactic placeholder or the missing mass of galaxies. Something to that. I mean, yes, I think that's going to be part of it, but I think we're going to find out that this dark matter is every bit as dynamic, if not even more dynamic than the reality that we're experiencing in our own matter-based reality. And this dark energy that we talk about, and I'm going to get into this more as we get into the presentation here. Dark energy is at work right in front of us right here. It's gravity. Gravity is, when you start to think about this, gravity on a multi-universal scale. And when you think about it like this, gravity is moving like the depths of the ocean out here. Okay, even in the depths of space between galaxies within the scope of our universe, I think it's working a lot like the depths of the ocean. And I'm going to talk about that later too. Gravity, I think, nature is a lot like water. So what's going on is while it can, on the one hand, pull energy together, pull matter together, it can also pull energy and matter apart, even on galactic and universal scales. And in this case, as we're looking at in the analogy, on multi-universal scales. Okay. Now I want to just do this image of the torus. I love this image. This video does a really nice job, I think, of showing some of the movements and the lines of the torus. And I think this is an important connection to make, because in really understanding, trying to make the visual connection, try to create something visual in one's mind to explore these levels of reality, I feel like this movement, think about it, it looks a lot like the kaleidoscopic movements of the images I was just showing. I think this torus and the kaleidoscope fused together, I think, is the closest thing I can come up with as a non-physicist, creating a form of communication, maybe even a sort of language, if you will, upon which to explore a level of reality for somebody who's not a physicist, who's somebody who just has a crazy visual acuity like I do, who wants to explore this and maybe even work with physicists and scientists and trying to expand on what this is really all about. And I think there really is something to this. Come out of this a little bit. This will be the last video I'm going to show for right now, and we'll get back to the presentation here. So I apologize for the kind of difficulties here with this, but I feel like it's important to give you these visuals. I think it really helps to try to illustrate, you know, what I'm saying, because the words just really seem to fail to try to really try to illustrate or exemplify what's really being talked about here. Now, the importance of this video, and I'm not going to say anything during the course of this video. This, to me, is one of the most, I think, one of the most brilliant things on YouTube. It's a public domain video at that, and I love it. It's a woman. It starts with her being an Angkor Wat, and it's going to just go zoom right into her eyeball and essentially into her brain, into her mind, her thoughts, and it's going to take us into a journey right in terms of my perception of it, right into the unified field itself, right into the multiverse, and then right back. Yeah, all right, I'm just going to let you just enjoy this. It's brilliant, but it's an example, it's a reflection of that idea of what we've been talking about, of it begins where it ends where it begins, as above, so below, that it's really all infused in one and the same. And it doesn't matter where you start and where you end, even with us, you, me, and everyone, and this wonderful woman right here. Gotta have music too. It's really cool. Ah, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I just love that. All right, let's get the presentation back up here. Oops, sorry about that. All right, here we go. So kind of bringing it back a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to kind of bring it into, now we've been kind of been traveling way out, getting into, of course, multi-universe, multi-universal existence, getting into the unified field, getting into what I feel like are the real, I guess, I call it the extremes of our realities, and what we consider to be the abstractions, although these are the true natures. This is the reflection of the true nature of our existence and our reality, and the true nature of who and what we really are. Um, and for as crazy and as weird it may sometimes seem to us, coming to understand and getting past that weirdness, I think it's going to go a long ways towards understanding and making sense of our world and the craziness of everything that it is. And they can certainly maybe get into that perhaps in another conversation and why that's important. For right now, getting back um, into our conversation now, the theory of everything. Given everything we've just talked about, I think it's understandable why I don't see gravity fitting into the theory of everything. You probably already understand that the theory of everything is kind of like E equals mc squared. It's meant to be an equation, a very simple equation that basically explains the universe. With respect to what is considered the four fundamental forces of the universe, that being electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and supposedly gravity. But physicists have been saying that while the aforementioned three forces seem to fit together perfectly well, it seems they work great together, gravity just doesn't. And not only does gravity not work there, it just doesn't at all. It's just absolutely, I guess it's just, physicists are bewildered why they can't even get it to work even a little bit. And I'm going to suggest because it doesn't belong as part of a fundamental force of simply the universe. It is a fundamental force of an entire multi-universal existence. Only thing more fundamental than gravity itself is consciousness. And I'm going to get deeper into that as we get more into the rest of this presentation. By talking about space-time gravity on these deeper levels of reality, getting into the, again, multiverse, also getting into even the unified field, even though the unified field is all potential reality. My perception, and I think it's been said before, but space essentially does. It gives shape and form and function to time. Time gives movement to space. And gravity really is like that, kind of like that ultra malleable foundation framework, um, sort of like the infrastructure, the girder infrastructure of a skyrise being built in the middle of like say Dubai or something like that. Only much more malleable and more infused right into the subatomic level. Because my suggestion is that gravity interacts with energy of all kinds, whether it's fundamental particle levels of energy to what we might perceive to be that multi-universal levels of energy and everything in between. Gravity is the mover of all of this. I think a current understanding with many scientists, I don't think this is true with all of scientists, but I hear this often, watch documentaries and read up on things often. And I'll use this analogy, which is why I use this nebula. I forget which nebula that I put in here, so apologize for that. But it's been suggested that when star formation occurs in a nebula, There's a lot of factors involved, and I realize we're still figuring that out. We still don't know exactly the processes that are involved in star formation, and of course the types of stars that evolve or that come out of that star formation and why and such. A whole other big area of conversation unto itself. But what I'm getting at from now is this: what gets everything in motion to begin that formation is gravity. I understand there's other factors involved. You've got obviously potentially solar winds, other energetic movements. I mean, I'm trying. There's a number of factors. I'm drawing a little bit of a blank right now. There's different things that, of course, that could spark movement in space. It is not this. The gravitational movement is not the only thing. What I'm suggesting is this: there's a back and forth like that play and display, but it begins with gravity. You're talking about something like star formation. I think ultimately what begins that process is going to be gravity, not just on this sort of on this, the physical layer that we're on this more corporeal layer, but understanding it's also happening on those quantum layers as well. All that energy is also moving. I mean, it all begins. In the unified field, all those unified layers. I mean, nothing here exists if it doesn't exist in a unified field. And understand too, just to be really clear, if I forget to say this at some point, in terms of a multi-universal existence, there's a singular unified field, one unified reality to an entire multi-universal reality. There's not a separate unified field per universe. It is a single multiverse, single unified field, single unified reality. I could modify the statement slightly to say it's space-time gravity. But again, it's gravity that's at the foundation of it all. If gravity isn't being basically the glue, that core, that base layer, like of a painting. A painter goes, to paint some beautiful, elaborate piece of work, and they typically start with a base. Usually a base color is oftentimes something dark. But it's that base that gives life to everything else. I'm not a painter, but I've watched it done enough times to know that that's a very integral part of the painting. And oftentimes the painting can't be what it's going to be without that base. And gravity, to me, sort of basically plays a role like that as part of the very foundation of all of our reality. The foundation of the very existence of particle reality emerging from the Higgs field, the very basis of molecular formation, the basis of why we exist, why stars are being formed, how obviously, we see it. This is the obvious stuff now. We see the, solar systems and the galaxies and so on. And the fluidity of it all. And even when it seems to be all chaotic, there's still a symmetry and a fluidity and an incredibly patternistic quality to it. There's a cosmologist named Laura Danley, who I can't remember where she said this, but she commented that if one part, if one part in a quintillion isn't doing what it's supposed to, subatomically speaking, if something isn't firing the way it's supposed to, isn't resonating, vibrating the way it's supposed to, one part in a quintillion, all creation as we know it collapses. So for all the so-called chaos and all the volatility and the violence we seem to experience, but then conversely, for all the beauty, the symmetry, the synchronicity, it's all it all comes, it's all the same mind, imagination that's to have the same ultimate fluid objective. Everything is ultimately seeking to pull itself together, but at the same time, even in its pulling itself apart, even as it's releasing, it's still growing and evolving and growing into something else, reflecting back again to the kaleidoscopic images that I've been showing. you can start to imagine as one embodiment is collapsing down, imagine energy being released and exploding off in energy and exploding off and growing embodiments that are expanding outwards and becoming their own forms of reality. And the neat thing about this too is you start thinking about different kinds of universes. What are we talking about here? On the one hand, we're talking about universes that might be different versions of ourselves, having different kinds of experiences. But then on the other extreme of it all, we have universes that might be so foreign and abstract, we couldn't even begin to imagine it, let alone think about existing in it, or even trying to observe it. Even in a conversation like this, looking at a multi-universal / unified existence. This is all the space-time gravity fabric at work. This is the gravity sculpting, shaping, molding, crafting this entire reality from the quantum level all the way out. And again, for any physicists that are watching this, I know you know all about this already. There's something that, again, that really resonated for me as I was, after my near-death experience, I'm having these new visions and trying to find ways to explain and understand what it is that's going on in my mind. I came across the Khan Academy, which I can't recommend enough. If you just want to learn anything, it's for somebody who, or if you're in school, for anyone who's in school, I think it's a great age for somebody who's going to college, going to high school, college, what have you. But I think if you're just somebody who wants to learn, it's a great place to go. And it's got everything you could possibly want to learn, basically. But anyway, Salman Khan is the guy who started it, and he made a lot of the early videos, and he explained something that, again, early on, as I'm trying to understand how electrons work, how the heart in their relationship to the nucleus of an atom, and how this idea of, like, say this, the traditional perspective of an atom, and the idea that you've got electrons that are revolving very seamlessly around a proton neutron nucleus at the center. And I think many theoretical physicists nowadays and many scientists nowadays are seeing that this perhaps is more of an antiquated view of the atom. Now, of course, quantum sparkles, that's my term. I don't think it's very scientific. I apologize. But the reason I use the term quantum sparkles here is relating to what I mentioned a couple slides ago about the valence shell, the idea of a quantum valence shell, the electron valence shell, with respect to an atomic structure. Now, the valence shell, what it basically represents, and again, this is just going to be kind of my expression of it, not that I'm not saying anything that's that much different than what's been said, especially with respect to what Salman Khan talks about. But the valence shell is really about a probability factor of where electrons are going to be. Now, understand, electron has never been directly observed. It's the results. It's the result of their existence that this reason why we know they exist. And we in our attempt to observe it, it's always the potential for observation. Where are they going to be? What's the probability factor kind of thing? And the valence shell, what that represents is that probability factor. So if you're talking about, say, a single electron, a valence shell will represent potentially a single electron, and that shell is essentially the highest probability of where that electron is going to pop in relation to the proton at the so-called center of the atom. Now, the fascinating thing about this is that the valence shell is not like a hard shell. It's not to suggest that an electron is relegated to popping only within the confines of this proposed shell. Now, mind you, the shell is just something scientists just impose because they're trying to understand and kind of like we're doing right here, trying to put some kind of an analogy, put something to the discussion so we can actually look at this and have a way of having communication about this. So it's mathematically possible for that electron to pop anywhere. So in other words, it's also possible, say, for a hydrogen atom that's right here within your own body to pop on the other side of the universe from right here. From the scope of a single atomic structure is the information the impact, the has the qualities. I mean, it basically is the universe unto itself. And think about how powerful that is when you consider this is true for every single atom, every atomic structure. So getting back to the idea that the atoms can change states, that particles can change states, you kind of start to get a sense of the how and why they can do that. They have this absolute malleability, as they can literally moving through, like at the movement at the speed of thought, as the expression is. I've heard that expression many times, and one of my favorite expressions is Jonathan Hagelin, again, one of my favorite theoretical physicists, talks about how we live in a thought universe. And I feel like these are reflections of that. And the idea that these particles can move and exist and literally be a universe unto themselves. And of course, if they can move and pop, from, again, if a hydrogen within our own body right here could potentially, even if the probability factor is astronomical, but the potential still exists, that pop could still exist 13.8 billion light years away. I mean, that's powerful stuff. And that's within just the confines of your own body, let alone just one expression of the connectivity of everything in the universe. And you get a sense of why, if one part, a quintillion, isn't doing what it's supposed to, if it's breaking down, isn't firing, isn't resonating the way it's supposed to, why creation itself breaks down. It's kind of like Michael Ledwith, I think is his name, who's a Catholic priest and a physicist, had a great way of expressing it. I'm going to totally paraphrase this, of course, but he says, what is it that breathes fire into those physics equations? So yes, I mean, what is it that brings life to the science? What brings life to these equations? What brings it, takes the equations from equations to the experience? What goes from the equations to love, to ideas, even to our fears and insecurities? What brings these equations, out to life? How do you quantify love? How do you quantify the experience? It's a beautiful thing about this kind of science, and I'm going to propose this too. Metaphysics right now is considered, it's spirituality. Metaphysics is one day going to be a science that is going to be another area, I think, of theoretical physics. It's going to be physics relating to this area of our reality. Just throwing that out there. Because I think we've got people, hopefully it'll hear this, that will maybe go, I'm a physicist and I'm very open-minded. Let's explore this. Let's see what happens. And that is, of course, a goal of mine. I would love to connect with physicists who see the potential in this and want to put the physics to this, and maybe even put it through the process of turning them into working theories, so that we can put this out there and really see how this grows in the scientific and spiritual communities. Now, one of my favorite questions, because we hear this put out there all the time, the holographic universe. I feel like, yes, I think there's certainly a lot of truth to that. And there's a lot of evidence, to that idea. But I want to take it maybe a step in a different direction. I think there's a real prismic quality, I think, to particle reality. I think a lot of, when we're looking at this idea of valence shells, I don't think that we're looking at multiple different particles. We're looking at the same particle. And it's like you're looking at it almost like, again, and we're doing this all through this is all light we're dealing with. This is photonic reality that's I'm using as an analogy here. But I think this applies also to I think even electron reality and some of the other particle realities as well. With respect to the idea that I think we're looking at a complex, these particles are in effect these incredibly complex reflections of themselves. And if we could really break these down, I don't think we would see these infinite numbers of particles that we're thinking we're going to be seeing. I think it's going to be a whole lot more rudimentary and basic than that, but it's just, there's this incredibly complex and multidimensional kind of prismic effect, but holographic, but then gone prismic. And again, it would take, I think, a long time to really explain. And I think we could dive into it. In fact, I would love to have a conversation about that. What do we mean by holographic versus prismic? But simply put, I think prismic is simply taking a single, say, electron. And even in the context of a valence shell situation, and it's looking at it that electron is simply a complex reflection of itself being seen, and we're observing it in the context of what seems to be what we call a valence shell. So the Higgs field, Higgs boson, this is one of the most fascinating things for me. You know, for me to geek out on, this is one of my favorite things to geek out on. And I was so glad for Peter Higgs when this, I mean, I don't know if you know his story, and we don't have time to dive into that now, but he's got an incredible story. Because when he first came up with this in the 60s, it almost ruined his career before he even had a career. And I think it's amazing that decades later, that it's literally been proven. It's a cool story. And he's kind of one of my heroes in the scientific community. And the Higgs field, it's a fascinating prospect to think about. The point we start to emerge from the unified reality, from the point of reality that is pure potential reality, to what may be the first point of locality. Literally, it's still a very non-local reality because we're talking about fundamental particle reality here, still very non-local, but yet this will be the first point of experiential reality because it's about the first level upon which we are able to begin to, as scientists and as human beings, start to observe. And this Higgs field is kind of that transitory point between where we go from potential reality to that first point of particle reality. And this is the point where I think this is where we start to emerge. This is where, of course, the electrons and quarks and all of these most fundamental particles emerge. And I think a lot of the things we're starting to delve into now, we're getting into, I think, axions and other things that are really fun that I think are considered fundamental particles that are all emergent from this field as we start to actually break down, collapsing from the wave function, if you will, collapsing from the superposition to specific points in a timeline, specific points in an experience. In this case, starting with the first points of a particle, fundamental particle reality. And of course, here, this to me, my feeling is this is where gravity emerges. Where quantum reality begins, gravity begins. Or shall I say, where gravity begins, quantum reality begins. As I said earlier, I tend to equate the nature of gravity and its movements to water. Now, as we're looking at this, and I realize we don't have a ton of time here, but because again, so many things I'm getting into here, like I said at the beginning, I just want to just put this out there, even if we can only get into all these pieces just a little bit right now. I just really want to get as much of this out there as possible. So maybe we can just get the conversation going. Okay. Now, when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking in terms of, now see all the rocks in the water here in this river. Okay. Now, obviously, being a river, the water is moving. Now, for the sake of the analogy, imagine the rocks is a single particle, but we're looking at this as a valence shell, and all the rocks represent all the places in which the single particle is popping within the shell. Now, in a manner of speaking, it's kind of like, you know, when you're trying to start a fire in the fireplace and it's not quite coming to life, and then you grab I forget what the darn thing it's called, but you use the thing that you use to fan the flames, kind of squeeze it together to help fan the flames, give it a couple of little puffs, and all of a sudden it just comes, sparks fly, and all of a sudden it comes to life and a fire starts. In a way, that's what I feel like gravity is doing. It's like gravity is now being infused into the reality. Those first sparks of existence, the first quantum sparkles, if you will, are coming to life in this concept of what we would consider quantum gravity. And I want to be careful about that, because when we say quantum gravity, it's almost like we're differentiating quantum gravity, say, from macro gravity. And I don't want to differentiate it, because gravity is just gravity. Whether you're dealing with gravity on this fundamental particle level or gravity on the super macro levels, gravity, it's Now, its function and its form and how it may appear to us may be different on these different levels, but it's still going to be gravity. And I don't want to say quantum gravity is separate from gravity, because it's still that same vast, massive, incredible force of gravity. And again, I think we're starting to also get a sense too of why. Well, I'll go back one real quick. Why too? Scientists talk about, well, why does gravity seem like it's so much weaker than the other forces? Well, I think when you put gravity in a context of a multiverse like this, and when you start to think about gravity's power and how it works on the quantum levels, you can see why it would appear not to be as powerful as the other forces at work, meaning the strong and weak nuclear forces and electromagnetism. Just wanted to throw that out there real quick. Now, we don't have a lot of time here. Now, I do want to go through this. The parts of this I'm probably going to go through a little bit quick, but the biggest thing is I just want to I have an analogy in here where I talk about dark energy and why gravity is dark energy. And in referring to the kaleidoscopic analogies, we can get an idea as to how a primordial particle, through oscillations, or even through potentially, especially if it's maybe in a point of maybe an absolute zero or near absolute zero, where these superheated, super dense particles find each other through the depths of the bulk or hyperspace, as cosmologists call it, and eventually excite themselves to such a point where, again, a cosmic inflation potentially takes place. So, like anything in this multi-universal space, there's more than one way something can happen, meaning there's more than one way a universe can be born, more than one way a universe can die. The initial cosmic inflation, I'm not going to dive too much into this right now. We could certainly have a really long conversation about this, because I think this whole reality, getting into what is basically plasma reality here, is really fascinating, because I think we're really only just starting to understand what plasma really is. I mean, we've got plasma in our everyday lives, and also plasma, we know, is also inherent and infused in the fabric of the universe. And we've also talked about that, plasma was essentially, the only thing that, as far as we know, that really existed with respect to the initial cosmic inflation. And so think about it like this, just real quick. There was a point with which in cosmic inflation, everything was still way too hot for any form of atomic, any type of atomic formation to take place. So whatever on the particle level we might think about, again, this is a whole nother big long conversation unto itself. What is plasma really? One thing I will say about it, though, at this level of reality, there are no fundamental forces of the universe. Okay, there is no electromagnetism. Therefore, there is no cosmic speed limit. That is what we identify with in our current universe. Sometimes, if you watch Star Trek and some of these other sci-fi shows, you hear talk of subspace, fluidic space, and these other sort of alternatives to what we consider normal space. Well, my thinking is at some point we're going to find, as we delve into the nature and what plasma is to the fabric of the universe, there may be something to that. And I think plasma is going to have a connection to it. And I'm going to leave it there for right now with respect to plasma's role in the early universe. Referring to the analogy I was making to, let's see here. I see. Referring to the glacier analogy, the reason I do that, because of course glaciers move really, really slow. But I just want to make the point, and I use that because glaciers are also very dynamic in their movements. If you see a glacier movement that's sped up on like a stop motion or sped up photography, they look like water moving. I mean, there's a lot of dynamism in the movement of a glacier. But yet, when you stand in front of one, of course I've never have, but if you can see a picture of one, they're super dense. They're extremely hard. They're essentially like ice. You try to, I can imagine you try to dig through a glacier, it'd be extremely difficult. It'd be like trying to chip through ice. But yet they're incredibly malleable, almost liquid, almost like liquid malleable. So I'm going to suggest again that early plasma universe was just as malleable. Just so I'm not going to subscribe that it was lifeless, that it was static in all of its density, and even if there wasn't the forces that we identify with, I'm going to suggest that it was incredibly dynamic. Whatever was going on in that initial cosmic inflation was extremely dynamic, and whatever it was what it gave way to what became essentially the first cracks essentially in the universe, because we perceived that first cosmic inflation to essentially be a solid ball of plasma. Eventually things started to break a little bit, break apart, to crack a little bit. The first, obviously, what would potentially be megastars, the early protostars, the mega galaxies, which eventually would give way to galactic cluster formation. And of course, usually when the early examples, what would we start thinking of as dark energy, because now this what was extremely dense. I'll think about it like this. We understand that gravity's relationship with energy it's not necessarily just about mass, but about density. And volume is secondary. I mean, it's obviously part of it. Now consider this: as the universe is expanding, it's losing its density. It is losing mass. No doubt it's losing energy. And in the process, its relationship with gravity is going to be changing. So this is where we start getting into the idea of dark energy. And I suggested this earlier when we were looking at the kaleidoscope analogy, the kaleidoscope and the torus analogies. So what's happening is again, picturing that the kaleidoscope torus, and a part of that, as and a part of where you can see, and I made the point showing with the cursor where a section that was starting to expand out, saying, hey, this could be our universe right here. It's still small. The space between galaxies, the space between clusters is probably not that great. In fact, at this point, clusters are probably still but a singular super galaxy. So everything's so close together, but yet at this point, again, it's becoming a little bit less dense. So its relationship with gravity is already changing. It gets to a point where relationship with gravity changes to such an extent where, and again, I'm going really fast through this and simplifying it, but it changes to a point where gravity all of a sudden is fighting gravity not to pull the galaxy, the universe apart too fast. It's almost like gravity's like it's fighting to push itself out, but it reaches a certain point where it's pushed out so far. Now it's trying not to push out too fast, but that's what starts happening. It's pushing out, but it starts pushing out even faster and faster. Now, this is why. Now, I'm going to get into dark matter a little bit here as well. And as I mentioned earlier, dark matter certainly will be playing a role in all of this because, again, all these everything that has gravitational relationships is going to be integral in the movement of our universe, in the movement being outward in relationship to the other universal embodiments with respect to that kaleidoscope torus analogy. And I think that dark matter, we're going to find out, also could be the overflow of other universal embodiments infusing into our universe as one potential possibility, in addition to the possibility of being a missing mass of our galaxies. And it could be all of the above at the same time, because we're talking about realities that are completely infused. In our minds, we're trying to keep everything all separate to an extent that may be true. But I think, again, as we get more into this, we're going to find out that this is all so much more infused, and thinking about how that kaleidoscope torus analogy works. And I've been referencing this a fair amount through this presentation already. But gravity works like water. I really look forward to seeing the discoveries that I know are on their way, more gravitational wave discoveries. I think the idea, now think about it like this. We hear about gravitational eddies and whirlpools again in sci-fi all the time, but usually it's in the context of just say, like snaring a spaceship or something like that. Now, if the universe is expanding, and gravity is dark energy, and gravity is the reason why the universe is expanding, then how is it then that the galaxies still hold themselves together? How is it that solar systems still hold themselves together with galactic clusters and so on? I'm going to suggest that this idea of gravitational eddies and whirlpools may not be relegated to something the size of a starship. I think we're looking at something along the same lines, only in this case, we're talking about a gravitational eddy or a whirlpool the size of a galactic cluster. Again, I'm oversimplifying everything here because I just want to get this out there so we can get this conversations going about all these different areas and ideas and all this information that just keeps coming to me about what's really going on in these levels of reality. Getting into, again, think about, again, why we have galactic clusters, why these gravitational eddies work the way they work, how gravity can kind of move through itself to keep something like a galaxy together, a cluster together, a solar system together, and so on. And if gravity does move like water, think about waves on a beach. Now, most of us have sat on a beach before, right? Now, even in this picture right here, I have to get my picture to come in, or my cursor. Now you can see, even on the surface, all kinds of dynamics going on. You've got a wave right here, all these ripples in the water here, another wave forming behind it, wave here, and then in the waves you see lots of ripples. You see kind of some mist coming off the waves. Let's get a little bit closer in here. Okay, now you see like what looks like 1, 2, 3 layers of water right here. Okay. Now this top layer right here is probably going back in. This layer of water right here, this is what, as we know, creates a potential undertow. So if you're standing in what's probably just a couple, 3 feet of water right here, and this water comes rushing out and comes underneath your feet, it might grab your feet and you can actually get sucked under and pulled out into the ocean a little bit. Now it's fascinating to think that while that's going on, this layer of water is still brushing up onto the beach. Now you've got this next layer of water that's brushing up right behind it, while this layer of water now is going back out and retreating. Now, if you're looking at, again, somebody who's really studying the water and studying this moment, the movements of the water just in the context of this little space of a beach right here, no doubt would even be more dynamic than that. But think about it. If gravity is working like this in the depths of space, it's not that tough to imagine how gravity could be pulling the universe apart while at the same time holding together galactic clusters, galaxies, and so on. Another analogy I like to use. Okay, imagine, this bucket. Water in the bucket is gravity. The water coming in the bucket, that's gravity. Okay, first of all, the bucket is the universe, okay? The water coming in the bucket, that's gravity. That's coming in, that's basically, that's holding, if you will, that's the attractive force, if you will. That's the part of gravity that's holding the universe together, if you will. Now, the holes in the bucket, now that's the cracks in the universe. That's the space between the galactic clusters. That's the space between the galaxies. And that's the space where gravity can move freely. And no doubt in multiple directions, but much of that gravity, no doubt, is moving away, with respect to other universal embodiments, other movements in that, in the kaleidoscopic torus. So if, just for the sake of example, the bucket's slowly getting bigger, the holes are getting larger, the flow of gravity coming in is slowly going to decrease because obviously this mass is continuing to be dispersed, density is being decreased. Factors, the relationship with gravity is changing. So the bigger these holes get, representing the idea that it's representing, that's the bigger the holes get, represents the vast amount of space between galaxies. It's representing that becoming larger. The idea that the galaxies and everything are growing away from each other, moving away from each other, expanding away from each other. The more that happens, of course, that means that's more room for gravity to move away. So all things considered, it's the gravity coming in is decreasing, maybe, even if it's staying the same, even if it's holding steady, ultimately gravity that's available for the universe itself is going to become less. The available amount of space for gravity to move away, presumably to other gravitational embodiments, universal embodiments, increases, and you start to get try to get a picture of, again, a very rudimentary picture of how or why the universe is not only expanding, but expanding at an ever increasing rate. And we get to a point where we see the universe that we experience today. And of course, the current belief is the universe will end in a deep freeze / big rip, depending on who you're talking to. I think it's probably going to be a little bit of both. And we kind of got into a little bit of that earlier in the presentation. That first of all, it's very possible, again, in relating to the analogy of the kaleidoscopic torus here, it's very possible that there's been multiple oscillations. But then also too, when you think of the image of darkness, the image where it didn't seem to be much energy, in that one part of the analogy I was showing earlier, that could certainly represent a big rip, a deep freeze, and the potential for even a brief moment of absolute zero as the movements of the multiverse continue and ultimately set itself up for another expansion or movement or another rebirth of energy of some kind. Again, you were talking about an infinity of possibilities here. Simply put, and this is true for life, existence, you, me, the stars in the sky, every blade of grass. It's, energy is always changing shapes. It's always changing forms. It's always moving. It's always shifting. And including when we die, when you die, when I die. And I think most of us that are going to be watching this, I think most that are associated with Sonic Bloom are going to agree. We're changing energies, we're changing states. It's a continuation of the experience. I mean, the body may die, but the soul continues. The soul is forever. That's that part of us, the divine part of us that lives on. That's a part of us that's love. And love is forever. And that's, if I may, I'm an NDEer, so I can say stuff like that, because it's true. Underlying all of this, at the source of all of this, is the divine hand at work. I made a comment about, Michael Ledwood's quote about what is it that breathes life? What is it that breathes fire into the physics equations? What is it that breathes life into particle reality? What is it that brings us to the experience we all create? The things that have meaning to us in our lives, that bring us to tears of joy, happiness, that bring us to grieving, that take us home. You know what I mean? That transform. And we start to get in touch with that. And this is what we do. And the more of us that can recognize and see and think outside the box. And I know it's like, what does all this matter to all of us down here on Earth? It's because you start to see where it's part of something so much bigger and beautiful and magnificent. And you realize it's me, it's you, it's us, it's what we really are. And it's like, no, how can you not be excited about that? How can you not want to reach out and just hug the person next to you and go, I love you. We got this. We can do this. Okay, I'm going off a little bit, but let me just kind of wrap this up. But again, I don't want to read through this word for word, but I think it's maybe we're getting to a point where we might want to rethink our definition of a universe. And after everything we've just talked about here, and I think with all the things that are being talked about, with all the amazing and incredible deep thinking minds out there that are covering many of the things that I've said here today, I think maybe we start rethinking what we consider to be a universe. I don't know that we need to separate multiverse and universe. I think we just need to look at this and say, this really is what the universe is. There's one verse, one universe, and that is this. We are the universe. If I can manage to see this, I would love to actually read this. I don't normally read stuff in my presentations, but I wanted to read this. I'm going to end it with this. Max Planck, if you don't know, I'm sure anyone here probably does know who Max Planck is. He's kind of another one of my heroes. He is essentially the father of quantum theory. I think it's just mind-boggling and mind-blowing that somebody in the late 1800s, around the turn of the 20th century, came up with this stuff. He was the first one to really have a real sense of this deeper reality. And it blows my mind that he said this. I don't know exactly what year, but it was probably right around, like just after like 1900. It wasn't not much past, the turn of the 20th century. And I love it so much, I'm going to read it. As a man who has devoted his life, no, as a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about atoms this much. There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is a matrix of all matter. That is you, me, everyone. The planets, the stars, everything that exists. We are one mind, one being, one divine God, goddess, all having experiences, divine experiences, trying to discover and understand ourselves, and this divine being learning to understand herself. Well, I think we have a few minutes here. I'm open for discussion, questions. Brielle, if you have anything to say, thoughts, insights. I know I just threw a ton of information out there, and I know this, if anything, I probably sparked a lot of questions more than had a lot of answers, which is what I wanted to do. Let's put this out there and let's have a lot of questions, and then hopefully over time we can start to find these answers together.
Wow. I am so impressed by that presentation. Thank you so
Wow.
much.
Oh, thank you, Brielle. I'm so nervous. Thank you.
It was such it was such a wonderful presentation, and I really love the quote that you ended with. Just this quote. I actually took a little picture just now to check it out. I'm just trying to get my, here we go. We're gonna pull me up big on the screen. I love the ending quote. Great work.
I mean, I would love for like Jamie Janover to hear this, and Nassim. I know Nassim is part of this. I would love to talk with those guys about this, and if you're, you're into this. I don't know you. But I'd love to find more minds that to just explore this further. I have a discussion group I'm a part of that I meet once a week, and we're been getting into this a bit, which I'm really honored and that they're into it. But I'm really wanting to get this out there because I'm not a scientist, and I would love to find somebody like Nassim who resonates with this, who is a physicist, that goes, you know what, let me put the physics to this and see what it looks like. That would be fascinating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rex. We were so blessed to have this incredible presentation. What a massive download, and I'm just so excited to see what the future of what you continue to learn and share. I just want to say thank you so much for sharing this and putting it together in such a beautiful way. I thought the entire presentation was just incredibly well done. I really enjoyed the videos, and I can't wait to see it at actual Sonic Bloom, hopefully sometime in the next couple of years here.
Well, I plan to be at the 2022, and if I can present live there, I will. And I would love to even maybe play music there as well. So I'm going to be going through that process. And if you want to do a part 2 of this at some point, I would love to. I'd love to, I have so much more to say here. So
Yeah.
if it's warranted, I would love to maybe do a part 2 in the summertime, possibly.
Perfect, perfect. Yeah, I'll reach out to you and we will see what else we can put together. I'm gonna go
Wonderful.
ahead and end the recording. Just one moment. Thank you for all who watched today, and I hope to see you tomorrow. And For the upcoming workshops, make sure to go to Sonic Bloom Academy and log into the portal. Much love.
Lots of love to you and lots of love to everyone. Thank you. Bless.